Okay, we are in Romans chapter 14. We're at the end of this chapter. We have been discussing with that, dealing with the scruples of others, dealing with the conscience of others, that there are certain things that we may have every right to, every liberty to, but we don't take those liberties as something that could destroy somebody else. We don't take those liberties to the point of where somebody else has stumbled because of us. Let's just begin in verse 21. Let's go to verse 20. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food, and he's using food just as a starting place, just as a principle, we might say, for the sake of food, because that's an optional thing. That is a liberty that we have. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil for a man who eats with offense. And that's going against your own conscience. And you should not do that. To go against your own conscience is that of learning and growing in faith. And this is a far-reaching principle, more so than just food. It goes beyond that, but it all has to do with liberties. This has nothing to do with doctrine that is to be taught and upheld and observed. It has nothing to do with that as far as that being an option. That's never an option. And it doesn't matter if someone is offended by that at all. That's up to them. This has to do with taking our own liberties, of where you have the liberty to do this. Yes, you also have the liberty to forego. You have the liberty to not do it for the sake of somebody else. And he's going to use Christ as an example in the next chapter, coming up in really just a few verses. Verse 21, it is good neither to eat meat, nor drink wine, nor do anything by which your brother stumbles, or is offended, or is made weak. Someone who sees you doing something, who thinks their conscience is not convinced, they also may see this as something beyond what you understand it as, and we've discussed that concerning that of food that has been offered to idols. Well, someone who's a follower of Christ would know the idol is nothing. Nothing happened. All that happened is that that animal was slaughtered over there in front of an inanimate object, as opposed to in a slaughterhouse or at somebody's farm. There is no difference whatsoever. And if someone does not intend on worshiping that God, then they're not worshiping that God. But if someone thinks you are, then you have to be careful of that and be aware of that, and you can forego. As we read last week, if meat makes my brother stumble, I will not eat meat again. All right, that is a freedom that he had, rightfully could do that, but for the sake of a brother, he wouldn't. For the sake of someone else's scruples, someone else's faith, he wouldn't do it. He would forego that. Now, verse 22. Do you have faith? Have it to yourself before God. Happy is he who does not condemn himself in what he approves. So let's go to 1 John. We're just going to look here. 1 John chapter 3 quickly, and verse 18. 1 John 3, verse 18. My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. So deed and truth. Verse 19. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before Him. All right. Knowing the truth, you can assure your hearts. Your hearts being your conscience. Your heart, of course, being your mind. And your conscience is part of your mind. All right, when you know the truth, then you can, in fact, your conscience can know the right and wrong of something. Now, our conscience already knows the basics. Your conscience knows already you should not be cruel to somebody, that murder is wrong, that dishonesty is wrong. already our conscience know that, and that can be destroyed in someone. But here are things that we need to grow in knowledge, and in growing in that knowledge, we can be assured. We can be assured in these things. Okay, now, verse 21. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, wait, we want verse 20 first. For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and knows all things. All right, so God's going to come into play in this, that with a heart condemning us, while we do not need to go against our conscience, God is greater than our conscience. He is greater than that. But we need to educate ourselves and understand what we can rightfully do, and also what others can rightfully do as well. The idea is not to remain weak in faith, but to grow stronger. That is the idea. Now, verse 21, Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence toward God. Confidence in Him, that we have been given the truth on every matter, and we have. Now, if you think that you have not been informed on a certain matter, or perhaps you need to look further, perhaps you need to ask some questions, because I can tell you right now, the Bible has answered every single question by way of principle. Now, not by way of exact, to the detail of every problem that one may have and every variation there may be in a particular principle, because the variations can be just infinite, I do believe. But the principles are there to be upheld, to be followed. Now, we come back to Romans chapter 14, and we go to the last verse in this chapter. But he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because he does not eat from faith. For whatever is not from faith is sin. One must have the faith that this is permissible. And that's all to do with your conscience, yes, and an understanding that everything you do must be done according to faith. Whether that is something that's obviously doctrinal or something that is optional. And yes, having the maturity to know that something that's optional, you can forego that. You have the option of not doing it. You have the freedom to do it, the option to not do it. All right, but here is this James 4:17 is saying the same thing. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Here is someone, just rewording this, someone who doesn't know if something's right or not, or believes that something is wrong, that you believe that something is wrong and you do it, well, you've gone against your conscience. You've gone against your conscience. Maybe you need to strengthen up. Okay? Maybe that something is perfectly okay for you to do. Perfectly fine. It's years ago. There was a young convert, and she was young as well. Not just new to the faith, but she was young. She was probably around 20. I'm not exactly sure what her age was. But she had been baptized. She was a member of the church, and she had been coming to church, and she had been faithful. And she told me, she said, now, I'm supposed to honor father and mother. I said, yeah, of course. She said, they don't want me coming to church. Okay, well, here's the problem in that. Here's the problem. And really, it's an easy problem to solve. But the problem for the parents is that no parent has the right to tell you to do something you are supposed to be doing. Okay, let me rephrase that, because that seriously needs to be rephrasing. Sorry. No parent can forbid you from doing something that God demands that you do. That's the sentence. No parent can forbid you from obeying God, nor can any other human being for that matter, whether it's spouse or whether it's authority of some sort, whether it's governmental agency. No one has the authority to tell you, to forbid you from doing something God has commanded all of us to do. All right? And so she was at a quandary. I know I ought to be going to church, but I also have to be obedient and honor my father and my mother. She was at this quandary. Well, it's not a quandary. Okay? And once she understood that, and here's the point in all this, once she understood that, that didn't bother her conscience anymore. That somehow I ought to be honoring my father and my mother, and going to church means I'm not doing that, and so I guess I shouldn't be going to church. All right? And so her conscience was very much at a crossroads here of what am I supposed to be doing? That if I do this, it seems right, but also seems wrong. And if I do this, it seems right, but also seems wrong. What do I do? Well, knowing the truth, then, well, everything's settled. And her conscience could come right into line and understand. And that's what is meant there by knowledge. Having that knowledge, having that assurance from God. Now, we go to chapter 15. So, we come to 15 and the discussion isn't over yet. Verse 1, we then who are strong, and here's the principle, and it is more than just food. We've talked about this, and this is a principle that is based on love, based on concern, based on obedience. We then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak and not to please ourselves. Okay, so he is putting himself in this category. And of course he would be. He is strong in the faith. And he does have certain freedoms, and he knows that he has those freedoms. He knows that he does. Paul knows he's got them. And he knows that everybody has them, but not everyone has that faith. Because not everyone has come to that knowledge. Come to that knowledge of understanding that there is a freedom in this. A freedom, a liberty given by Christ. And these are matters of options. That's it. Matters of options. That there's a freedom that is there, a liberty that is there, but we are to bear with the scruples of the weak. What are scruples? Okay, scruples are actually, that is all part of the conscience. It is part of ethical behavior, and it is a thought or a feeling that keeps you from doing something because you believe it's wrong. Okay? That everybody, well, I say everybody, most people, the people who are not mad, and I mean that in the sense of crazy, people, sane people everyone has scruples. Everybody does. Everybody has a point where they will go up to that point and no further. Everybody does. Now, Satan does not, by the way. But everybody, unless they're absolutely insane, has a certain point that they say, I will not go any further than this. Now, they may surprise themselves and do it, and then they've just shifted. They either feel guilty about it, or they just shifted on down the hill, as it were. They shifted on down and say, okay, well, I won't go this far then. I won't go this far. But here, dealing with the scruples of the weak means someone who is weak in faith and something that they don't believe they do have a liberty. And so we deal with that person. We deal with the scruples of the weak and not to please ourselves. Just being selfish. Because I can do this, I'm going to do it regardless of anybody else. I'm going to do this simply because I can do it, without asking the question, should I do it? Should I do it? And is it possible that this action is going to harm anyone else? Now, I gave this, it was in a sermon, I do believe. not too long ago, and I gave this example. Or maybe I did it in here, but it works perfectly for what we're talking about now, but it's been several weeks. But it was years ago as a young preacher that I bought at Sam's this iced tea, and of course if you're buying at Sam's, you're not buying one. You're buying a load of. I forgot the brand of it. It was iced tea that came in a bottle. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'd like to have that at the office. And be kind of nice to be able to drink something at the office. And so I had that, a bottle of it one day on my desk. And of course the office door is open, and one of the elders passed by, and he does a double take. And I realize he's looking at the bottle. And I realized then, that looks like a beer bottle. It hadn't even occurred to me. It had not even occurred to me what it looked like. I can clearly see the label, and it says iced tea, sweet. Okay, it says that. Now he can't see the label, but he can see the shape of the bottle, and it does look like a beer bottle. All right, now, and I know he's wondering, what idiot have we hired here who's drinking in his office? And I had to explain to him, it didn't occur to me. This is iced tea. This is all this is. But if someone else had seen it who wasn't going to question, who wasn't going to say anything about it, somebody else came through, it may very well have been a stumbling block to them. Well, one of the preachers drinks, and he drinks in his office. I saw him drinking a beer. And they may go right to that and think it's absolutely permissible, that that's what they ought to be doing. Social drinking, by the way, is wrong. All right? Casually consuming alcohol is wrong. Well, what do you mean by casually? Take a little wine for what reason? Your stomach's sake. That's Paul telling Timothy. It's medicinal. There's nothing wrong with things that are medicinal. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And we're on a completely different subject now. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it is necessary. And obviously, if Timothy had been drinking alcoholic wine, Paul wouldn't have had to have told him that. If that was so common, if that's something that he just would have been doing, Paul would not had to have not needed to tell him anything about here's something that will help your stomach. This is something that's going to help with whatever ailment you have at the moment. Okay? Now, we need to bear with the scruples of the weak and not to please ourselves. And yes, I never took another one of those bottles in a public place ever again, to my office or anywhere. Yes, I did drink them all, thank you very much, but not to where anybody else could have possibly seen them. But here we go to verse 2. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification, which takes us back in chapter 14, verse 19. Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things which, by which one may edify another. So this is for his good, leading to edification. That's a constant behavior. And that's a constant understanding that even for someone who's not a member of the church, we need to consider their conscience and consider what they believe. Now, understand their conscience cannot forbid you from doing what is right, and I mean what God demands out of all of us, or demands out of you specifically. It's that doesn't override God's commands. This is all has to do with things that are a liberty. You can do it, you cannot do it. It's optional. These are things that are open that you can if you want to, but you don't have to. And Paul's saying, then I won't. If it means that I'm not leading to edification to those around me, I'll not do it. I'm not going to do it at all. Now, verse 3. And here is our example. For even Christ did not please himself. This is showing us, by way of Christ's example, and going to Psalm 69 to explain the fact that this is the way he was going to be. Going back to Psalm 69, which is about the Messiah, by the way. It is about the Christ. It is prophecy about him. Obviously it is. But there's more than one thing about Psalm 69 than what's brought up in Romans chapter 15. But Christ did not come to please himself. If he was, I think we talked about this last week in a sermon, he would not have left heaven if he's just going to please himself. He would not have left heaven. And as I explained personally, I know I wouldn't. I wouldn't. If once entering into heaven, I know it'll be a place where you can either be here for eternity, or if you'd like to visit earth every now and then, you can do that. Well, no thank you. I don't think I want to visit earth anymore. That's behind me, and this is so much better. No thank you. I don't think I want to do that at all. It's like going to someone saying, you know, if you wanted to return back to that portion of your life that was so incredibly and emotionally difficult, you can do that now if you'd like to do that. And of course you would say, no thank you. I lived through that. I don't want to revisit that. I have gone on and I don't want to return to that. But coming to this, he did not come to please himself, but as it is written, so Psalm 69:9, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. Now, that can seem like I don't quite understand how this fits into the argument. Let's go to Psalm 69. Psalm 69, and just look at how the fact that he did not come to please himself at all. We'll just begin in verse 7. Psalm 69, verse 7. And understand that Christ could have, if he wanted to, Jesus could have avoided pain and reproach, and he could have been king, because on this earth and been made king in John chapter 6, because they were going to make him king. He could have been. If that's the type of king he was supposed to be, I suppose he would have accepted it. But that's not the type of king he was supposed to be. He's to rule in heaven, and he is ruling in heaven right now. He was never to sit on a throne on earth, in Jerusalem, or anywhere on earth for that matter. His throne is there at the right hand of God. Okay, now we come to Psalm 69, verse 7. Because for your sake I have borne reproach. Shame has covered my face. So here I want you to know that here is sacrifice and humiliation brought about or borne by love. He didn't have to make these sacrifices. He didn't have to have any kind of humiliation. But he did for our sake. That's love. He did for our sake. And that's the point that Paul, actually the Holy Spirit, is making in Romans chapter 15. that Christ is willing to do these things for us, should we not be willing to do a little bit for those around us? Because what He did is far greater than anything we could ever achieve. But ours is, we might say, small potatoes compared to what He did, which are enormous. But we continue on. Verse 7 again, though. Because for your sake I have borne reproach, shame has covered my face. I have become a stranger to my brothers. Is that true? Yes. Concerning Jesus? Yes. His brothers didn't believe Him until after the resurrection. Then they did. But prior to that, they did not believe. And that would be one of those things that would be very, very hard emotionally. That those that I grew up with, they don't believe. And of course His enemies, though the New Testament doesn't say as much, but His enemies would latch onto that of, well, what do His brothers have to say about it? All right, well, they don't believe Him either. Okay. And, but I've become a stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children. Verse 9, because zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. Who is He talking to? This is the Christ talking to the Father. The reproach that the enemies of God had toward God, all of it fell now directly on Jesus bodily. While God still has those on the earth to this day who reproach Him. But no one can reproach Him bodily. No one can do it bodily. But here the Son of God did have to do this. And all that hatred, all that bitterness, all that wickedness now put right on top of Him, against Him and His persecution of Him. Did He have to do it? No, He didn't. He didn't. But for the sake of love, He does. Love of the Father, but also love for us. And I firmly believe in what Jesus said, that if He wanted to stop the crucifixion, He could call for 12 legions of angels. And I'm just wondering, not only could they stop that, 12 legions could stop just about anything on the earth. I think one could stop about anything on the earth. I have a feeling that would be the case. We'd be absolutely powerless against an angel that is set to do that and authorized to do that. But here, Jesus is now understand, Paul is bringing out Psalm 69:9 as an example of what Christ did for us, and we should be willing to do that for others. This is an implied message. It is learning by way of an example that Jesus did, but also He's taking Psalm 69:9 and showing a portion of the implication that's there. And there's more than one message that's implied there. We could take this and do quite a number of things, and I doubt that we could get to the end of it. But there is a message implied. And the Word of God is endless in growth, our growth, and in its teaching us and refining us. It's extraordinary, actually. Extraordinary. Verse 10, when I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, that became my reproach. Now, that's not the only reproach, because he talks about the enemies of God here. Those who reproach you have fallen on me. That's not the reproach of fasting. That's not what that is. Verse 11, I also made sackcloth my garment. I became a byword to them. That is a far distance There's an enormous gap between where he was prior to his birth on this earth, where he was then, and here in sackcloth and become a byword. Verse 12, those who sit in the gate speak against me, and here is this other one. And I am the song of the drunkards. The drunkards have made me into a song. All right, that wouldn't be an admirable thing. That the drunkards, it's a matter of mockery, no matter how you look at it. It's a matter of mockery, whether the words are intended to mock or the words are actually intended to somehow glorify. From a drunkard, you don't get glorification. Okay? From a drunk, you get the behavior and the reputation and everything that goes with the drunkard. Now, this person is not sober. This person is not serious. And nothing about this person can be taken seriously. All right? With that, Jesus did have reproach. Did he have the liberty to stay in heaven? I believe he did. I believe he did have the liberty to stay in heaven. I don't think that he was obligated, absolutely obligated, to come here. If he said he could stop it by 12 legions of angels, I think he could have stopped it by saying, no, I'm not going down there to begin with. He could have just stopped it and said, this is not going to happen. He could have. But by way of righteousness, by way of love, everything happens precisely as it did for our benefit. For our benefit, which is precisely how we are to live our lives for others, for their benefit. And that means that we have to be the proper example for others. I taught a class years ago, and it was a group of teenagers. And I told them, I said, believe it or not, there are people who look at you and they follow your example. And they were thinking, I know they were all thinking adults. Adults are looking at us and following our example. I know that's what the first thing that was in their head. And I said, it's not the adults. There are those younger than you. Younger than you. They may be 6 years old. They may be 10 years old. They may be 3 years old. But you are someone to them. You're someone. And your example is going to be in their head. Your example, they may very well follow because they admire you because you're older than they are. They admire you because you know things they don't know. You can do things they can't do. You have all these things about you they simply don't have yet. They admire you and they will follow you. Now, follow Christ, because that's what Paul is saying in this. That's what Paul is saying, that if you want an example of where someone has done this and done this to the absolute limit to it, of where you cannot even get close, it is Christ. Christ did it. Christ just decided from eternity, He's going to give up every liberty that He had there in heaven, every right He had there in heaven, and come down here for us. Now, let's read verse 3 again. So we're back in Romans chapter 15, verse 3. And once again, this is the sacrifice of so many things for our benefit. For as obedience to God, but for our benefit. And this is the source of this is love. Verse 3, for even Christ did not please himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproach you fell on me. It's this implied message that comes all the way in the example of Christ, that comes all the way from Psalm 69, verse 4, for whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. Now, he says this immediately after quoting Psalm 69. And this shows that the Old Testament, just in this alone, and there's more places that we can show it, in this place alone shows the Old Testament has extraordinary value. Because the Old Testament teaches us things we need to know. And it has principles there, and it has implied messages there. And Psalm 69 is not the only place where an implied message is now shown in the New Testament. Not at all. Not at all. But here we have that the things that have been written in the past, these Scriptures, they have benefit. It's for our learning, that you have the patience and the comfort of the Scriptures. We might have hope. And yes, you do. Well, let's just look at this for a second. If all we had was the New Testament, there's a value in it. But we need something to prep us before we get to the New Testament. Because let's just go to Matthew chapter 1. The New Testament begins this way. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Okay, so if all we have happens to be the New Testament, Jesus Christ, what is Christ? You don't know. You don't know that there have been numerous prophecies about the Messiah. Now, that's the Hebrew word. Christ means the same thing. It's the Greek word. Well, we've transliterated it from the Greek. Who's David and who's Abraham? You don't know, and you don't know why it matters. But this is just the beginning of it. If all you have is the New Testament, you can't know how this matters, and you cannot really know if Jesus is the Christ or not. You can say he spoke some extraordinary things, but there would be no signs there other than miracles he's producing. Signs, no fulfillment of prophecies. None of that would we know anything about. The Old Testament is for us to learn from it, to see every bit of this fits together, just like cogs in a machine. They fit perfectly together. Perfectly machined parts that come together and they work. Prophecies, more than just a few. Prophecies in the Old Testament telling us about Christ, about things that are going to occur in His life, things that are going to occur after His life on this earth, after He's here, things concerning His kingdom. All that is there. And it is teaching us by way of those prophecies, also by way of, in Psalm 69 is a prophecy, but implied messages off of there. Implied messages. Now, let's go, so we're back in Romans chapter 15 and verse 5. And these next two verses go together in all this. Now may the God of patience and comfort grant you to be like-minded toward one another according to Christ. So like-minded as what? As the way Christ was. Let the mind of Christ be in you. You be like Him. You be like-minded, like Christ. And when we're both like Christ, we're both like each other because we're imitating Christ. And having that same idea of patience, of bearing with one another in love, all of these things and willingly sacrificing what needs to be done at the moment and not living for ourselves. We live for God and we live for each other. Now, verse 6, that you may with one mind and one mouth glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Just as He did, we can too, and we should be. Just as Christ did these things, so should we be doing things like Him. But as we've already said, they are small in scale compared to what He did. Small in scale, but that's the best we can do. The sacrifices we make are nothing compared to the sacrifices He made 2,000 years ago. Nothing like it. And showing us how we are to treat each other and obey God. Verse 7, so here we have a conclusion. Therefore receive one another, just as Christ also received us to the glory of God. So we have to ask the question, how did Christ receive us? So that we know how to receive each other. He receives us in love, in acceptance, that the gospel is for all. And that is a good thing. There's no negative side to that. It is for all. And regardless of sins that have been committed, the gospel is for all. Christ, as the hymn says, Christ receiveth sinful men. All right, but that's at their repentance, yes. And that's why you can have a Saul of Tarsus, who is not only a Christian, but he's an apostle of Christ. And that's how you can have others who, such as Mary Magdalene, a prostitute. He cast out 7 demons out of her. Mary Magdalene accepts her fully and accepts a Saul of Tarsus fully. And that's how He receives us, and that's how we are to receive each other, in love and wanting the best for each other, wanting the best. Verse 8, now I say that Jesus Christ has become a servant to the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made to the fathers, and that the Gentiles might glorify God for His mercy, as it is written, for this reason I will confess to you among the Gentiles and sing to your name. Now this goes into the overall subject of the book. Everyone needs Christ. And everyone can be in His kingdom. Everyone can receive His mercy. Everyone can be a fellow heir with Him. Everyone can be a sibling with Christ. Everybody can. Jew and Gentile. Everyone. And I want to thank everyone for being with us. We will continue this. We are going to be going through chapter 15 and then closing things out in chapter 16, saying that we're getting toward the end of the book. And it is the book of Romans is an extremely valuable book. And I want to thank everybody for being with us.